tell me about the book and how you came to write it.
It happened during the pandemic.
Hmm.
I've been teaching mindful self-compassion for 11 years, and I was teaching a different method for calming down your nervous system, and I was adapting it while I was teaching it all the time. It was the acronym RAIN, recognize, allow, investigate, not identify. And I came up with SNAP on my own because I wanted to front load soothing touch. You see, I have my hands here on my
Hmm.
heart for people that are listening and not watching. So,
Hmm.
soothing touch is the mammalian caregiver response, and it allows oxytocin and endorphins to get released in your body. When an infant in the wild cries out and it gets picked up, the feel good hormones get released in the infant and in the person that's picking them up, usually an adult. So we can do that for ourselves. So it might be cradling your face, it might be hands on your heart, it might be one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly, or both on your belly. It might be hugging your arms or holding one hand in the other hand, or putting your hands on your thighs. One of those motions is going to start the calming down that you want when you feel activated by something like fear, anger, grief, sadness, something that's not joy, right? Or that's
Hmm.
not neutral that you want to shift. So you start with soothing touch. That's the S in SNAP. Then the N is name the emotion, name it to tame it, feel it to heal it. But you're also giving your prefrontal cortex the more seconds that it needs to come online, right? And then
Hmm.
the A is what do I need to hear right now? And you tell it to yourself. What do I need to do right now to shift my mood? And that's your toolbox of what brings you joy. And you just keep doing that until you start feeling better. And then the P is praise, and it can be yourself, your teachers, the universe, your deity of choice. And so when I teach it, I teach people snap, soothing touch, name the emotion, act, and praise. And these dance moves with the hands and the arms are like a neuro linguistic hack so that
Hmm.
people remember it. And then eventually they don't need to do the hand and arm movements, but that's how I teach it so that it gets coded. And then they remember it and they just do it.
Amazing, amazing. I like the rewiring. Do you know the saying, "What fires together wires together"?
Yes, I do, because I'm a neuroplasticity teacher.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
That's Rick Hansen. So
Go ahead, go ahead.
taking in the good. So you take in or create a positive mood and you push it from a mental state to a neural trait by enriching it and absorbing it in your body. And that takes a dozen or so seconds. So it's not, that's a beautiful sunset. What's for dinner? It's that's a beautiful sunset. Wow, look at those colors. And just like taking it in for a few beats, boom, you've created a happy bridge. And the more happy bridges you create, because what fires together wires together, the negative ones get pruned out. So then your wandering mind is a happier place because for some people, it could be a bad neighborhood in there.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me more about what it means to be a neuroplasticity teacher. That sounds
Well,
fascinating.
so it's the positive neuroplasticity training professional course that I took years ago from Rick Hansen in a 4-day training.
Oh,
He,
cool.
he wrote Hardwiring Happiness, which is really the bulk of that specific thing, but taking in the good is what he calls it to make it, because positive neuroplasticity training is kind of a mouthful. So taking in the good, state to trait. He also wrote Buddha's Brain, which was one of my favorite first books of his. He wrote Neurodharma, which he created a course that I took and actually went to a retreat of Neurodharma. He wrote Resilient. I mean, he's when I was first being interviewed for my first book, I said something about how great he was and his books are on a television show in Portland, a morning show.
Hmm.
And my publicity person called me and said, well, if you want people to know Rick Hanson's name and buy his books, keep it up. Like really snarky. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I do.
Nice. Yeah.
No, I actually do. Because she's like, I was able to look him up and see his books right while you were still talking in your 4 minute segment. And I'm like, no, no, no. He's my mentor. I actually do want people to do that. And since that time, I have I have personally promoted many of my teachers' books because yes, they're good.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me Buddha's Brain. That sounds fascinating.
Oh
You
my
mentioned it's
God.
one of your favorites. Can you tell me like what's that all about?
Okay, so I read that at a retreat at Spirit Rock before I wrote my first book, Life Falls Apart, but you don't have to. Um, and I remember underlining and tabbing because he just has an incredible way of bringing the contemplative tradition of Buddhism and contemporary science together and
Fascinating.
talking about it in a way that somebody who's not a scientist and not a Buddhist can completely access.
Very cool. Are you a scientist or a Buddhist?
No, I'm a recovering lawyer and I did study Buddhism as a grown up for 10 or 15 years, which means nothing, in terms of me being able to say that I'm a Buddhist, but I love the the good egg quality of it, the
Yeah.
wise speech, the kindness, loving kindness. I teach a Tonglen meditation and I practice it whenever there's a catastrophe. And you're in LA right now as we're taping this.
Yeah.
There's the big week of catastrophe there with the fires. So just it gives me a bigger, deeper toolbox to help my own nervous system when things are so scary and terrifying and sad. And then I can show up and be able to help others
Hmm.
because I can get out of bed and wash my face and brush my teeth and take a shower and put one foot in front of the other. I'm not incapacitated by the suffering.
Yeah, yeah. What are some tips? Can you share any tips for someone who's dealing with like a catastrophe in their own life, or maybe some people listening that maybe in LA? What are some strategies or tips that you can recommend?
I look for the helpers, and that's so like trite now, the old Mr. Rogers quote. But I not only look for the helpers, I try to be one.
Mm-hmm.
So on my social media from the first day of the fires, I was marshaling the links of which organizations are boots on the ground there helping for
Mm-hmm.
people to send donations so that if they felt so overwhelmed by what they were seeing that they can't even cope, maybe giving a donation would help.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, and then there's nature, I think is one of the, right now, nature's really scary in LA, but I can feel grateful that I can look out my window 2 hours south of there right now and the sun is shining and the air quality is okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as good as it would be farther from the fires, but I can have gratitude for that and tremendous gratitude that my family is safe and, just constantly, if you can move your perspective that and land in the gratitude hammock, it's going to feel better.
Yeah, nice. So you mentioned you're a recovering lawyer. How did you move from being a lawyer to what you do now?
It was easy. It was 3,000 miles.
Oh, nice.
I was licensed in Michigan. I moved
Yeah.
to California 32 years ago. So, and then I had babies, and it was easy to leave it behind for me.
Yeah, yeah. And how did you get into sort of teaching mindfulness?
I was a train wreck. I was literally a train wreck.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
What was going on?
The wrong words were coming out of my mouth.
Oh, really?
I thought I had a brain tumor. I went,
Uh-huh.
I went to a neurologist. He eventually, after the clearing my brain of any scary thing,
Yeah. Like you got like a scan of some kind?
I got brain scans, I did interviews. He diagnosed me with stress.
Wow.
So he recommended a mindfulness class, which I had never heard of, called MBSR, Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction. It's taught all over the world. It was created by John Kabat-Zinn, who people think of as like the grandfather of the mindfulness movement in America.
Uh-huh.
John Kabat-Zinn created it in 1979 for the pain clinic at University of Massachusetts. And he did so by looking at Buddhism and stripping it of any religious component and having it just be the science component. And then from 1979 till now, of course, it's been studied up, down, and sideways that
Yeah.
it's efficacious for all sorts of mind, body, spirit wellness, but tons and tons of studies, right?
Yeah.
So the neurologist recommended I take that class, and I'm in San Diego, so they teach it at different hospitals, but they also teach it at UCSD, which was closer to me at the Center for Mindfulness. So I took it there, and I was like, this is actually so fascinating. So I started taking neuroscience classes, which is how I found Rick Hansen.
Interesting.
I found him teaching an online class through NICAM. Okay, can I do this? The the Nash, I can't remember what NICAM stands for, but it's Behavioral Medicine National, blah blah blah, and they do all this online programming. And this was like in maybe 2012 or 2013,
Okay.
and it was called, I think, Compassion in the Brain, that class. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. And then Mindful Self Compassion was created by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. And I took that class because I was on the listserv at UCSD. And I was like, oh my God. And then they created a training program for teachers for MSC in 2014. And I took that and I started teaching it right away because it healed me. And so then I knew I could help heal others. So
That's
even though I'm
amazing.
not a therapist, most of the MSc teachers in that cohort, 49 of them were therapists.
Right.
Of, and then there was me and a physical therapist, so she was technically a therapist. I was basically the only student in the teacher training that was not a therapist. I was like the poster child for, oh, this healed me, you know?
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. And so you're like a mindfulness and meditation teacher, and are you taking private clients or are you working like out of like a studio, or how does that work?
I try not to take private clients because it looks like therapy when you do that because they're
Right.
telling you stuff. I want it to be me helping them build a toolbox to manage their own self,
Hmm.
regardless of what their stories are, right?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
teach various curriculum. I teach workshops. I teach drop-in mindfulness meditation on Zoom that are guided meditations with a poem, and then there's a Q&A where the science drops in. I teach a 5-day class. I teach a 6-week class. I teach all different depending on who needs what,
Yeah.
because I've adapted all the classes that I'm trained to teach through the Center for Mindfulness, which is the 8-week mindful self compassion class, the 6-week short course, the 6-week course for caregivers in hospital settings. Like I'm trained to teach all that stuff. And then I also create like the greatest hits of all of that.
Interesting. Very cool. What are some things that you would recommend for people to have in their own toolkit, if you will?
I think people should write down when they're not feeling poorly, when they're feeling well. I think they should write down a list of everything that brings them joy, just out of the box, from everything from listening to music to taking a walk in nature to taking a bath to planning a trip to calling a friend. That way, when they feel like crap and they would like to choose to change the channel to feel better,
Hmm.
they don't have to think of what to do. Eventually, you practice so much it becomes internalized. And if you're driving your car, you can't get in the bathtub if that's one of your go tos. But what can you do when you're driving in your car? There might be six things.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. So tell us a little bit more about Snap. Like, how does that, can you get like a little bit more granular on like how it actually relieves stress and restores calm?
Well, it's physiological how it does it. So let's say somebody cut you off in traffic or something. I mean, just like a real basic, and you get that flare up of like just outrage. You keep one hand on the wheel and you put
Hmm.
the other hand where you might find it soothing. So you play around with what feels good to you first when you're practicing,
Hmm.
and you notice the warmth of your hand on your body, and you notice that you're starting to calm down. And you might tune into your breathing, and you might breathe longer on your exhale because you're going to drop your blood pressure and your heart rate just by doing that. Your body does it for you, right? That's all of us primates. So you're calming yourself down. You've got your eyes on the road. Don't close your eyes. You've got one hand on the wheel. And then you name it. It was anger. What was under the anger? I like get really curious. A lot of times there's fear under anger, right?
Hmm.
So in the seconds that you're doing these things, the front of your forehead, your prefrontal cortex in your brain behind your forehead is coming online for you to make a more skillful response.
Hmm.
So it's interesting with stuff like that because I always go to, wow, I hope that person's okay. I get to the point of not what they did to me, but what's going on? Is their wife pregnant? Is she having contractions? Did they just get fired from their job? You know what I mean? Like, I get really curious about when somebody's having bad behavior, what happened to them?
Yeah.
Because I don't think people, my husband disagrees with me on this, but I don't think people generally want to behave poorly.
Yeah.
So something is causing them to suffer and they don't have the tools to manage their own self. So they are behaving poorly, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So then I tell myself what I need to hear. Julie, you're safe. Nothing bad actually happened, right? And then if I need, if I'm still activated for some reason and I need to pull a tool from my toolbox, I'll pull a tool. I might put on Carole King radio if it's not already on, because that's one of my joy things on my Pandora station. Or maybe I want to sing, and so I'll put on Shaka Khan radio. Or I'm
Nice.
really dating myself here, but it's okay. I'm 63. So, so these are like my tools, or maybe I'll call my best friend who lives in Detroit or whatever. And then I'll feel really good and it'll be the P part of Snap. And then I'll thank myself for doing such a good job managing myself. And then I'll thank my teachers. I'll thank the universe. And that's kind of how it goes.
Cool. Maybe, what's coming up for me is you could even thank the person who cut you off in traffic because now you had the opportunity to check in with your best friend. Maybe you wouldn't have done
Exactly.
that.
Perfect. Perfect. Right, right.
Yeah.
And it's not really Pollyanna. And it's not some people think you're bypassing, like you're doing. I don't think it's any of that. I think it's really empowering, having control over yourself.
I agree. You know what else? I like the idea of getting really compassionate for that person who cut you off. And you could think, oh my God, I hope their stomach feels okay. I mean, maybe they're rushing to get to the restroom and, please go, go.
Right.
My stomach is fine. I'm grateful for that. And hopefully yours is gonna be okay too.
Exactly. As long as I don't have dairy,
Yeah.
then I'm going to be the one on the freeway speeding.
Yeah, yeah. And then hopefully the person is they'll be
Right.
the one to let you go.
Right. Right.
So I think it's in your book you mentioned you have a name for what some people call their inner critic. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Am I allowed to say a swear word?
You can say whatever you want.
So yeah, I call my inner critic my inner bitch. Because I mean, I've made friends with her through
Uh-huh.
practicing internal family systems, which is the unit in the mindful self-compassion curriculum that I really go into in my first book. I actually
Sure.
show and teach the writing exercise, and I actually have the one verbatim that I did, which was really healing and helpful. So your inner critic, if you have a typical childhood, one that is not horrifyingly, where you're not subject to a terrible abuse or neglect. If you were,
Mhm.
don't even listen to this. It's not advised because there
Mhm.
will be no value to that voice. But if you have a typical situation growing up where your primary caregiver was doing their best, but they fell short many different ways, which we all do as parents, then your inner critical voice is most likely trying to help keep you safe, and they're just not skillful, or they're trying to have you do your best or whatever. So, as a grown up now, you can learn to access your inner compassionate voice, and that voice can tell your inner critic voice, you know what? Thank you for trying to have me do my best, keep me safe, whatever it was through the years, but I've got this now.
Mhm.
I like how I talk to myself better. You're not so skillful. You're retired.
Nice. So the first book was Life Falls Apart, but you don't have to. You mentioned that you talk about internal family systems in that book. Can you tell for the listeners out there what it IFS is short for internal family systems? Can you share a little bit about like what that is and why it's great and like maybe how someone can work with it?
Well, they could look up Dr. Schwartz, who is the founder of that, and there's actual internal family systems therapists and teachers, and they go into in a granular way into parts work. In the mindful self-compassion curriculum, they don't get down into labeling the different parts of you that you may
Mhm.
all have inside your head. It's a much simpler. You've got an inner critical voice. You learn what your compassionate voice is, and that's the voice that you would use when you're talking to somebody you love about
Mhm.
an issue. They got a D on a test, they got laid off from their job, they cheated on their spouse, or their spouse cheated on them. Pick any area of your development that where something bad happens, and how you would talk to that person that you care about. That's your compassionate voice, and you turn that around and you talk to yourself that way.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So another saying that I think is from one of your books is the bust your bra state of being.
So
What
this
is
doesn't
that?
work for boys. This doesn't work for boys or men unless they like to wear a bra, which is fine. I'm not judging.
Okay.
So that is when you're doing a loving kindness practice, and you have this incredible It's almost like a fire hose of love coming out of your sternum, of your heart, and you feel like incredible energy coming out of your body. I call that a bust your bra moment.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. So what else do we have here? You're a meditation teacher. Um,
I can teach anybody to meditate.
yeah.
People that won't do it, don't like to do it, don't want to do it, don't think they should do it.
What are some tips for anyone listening if they want to try to learn to meditate?
Just put in earbuds and follow the voice. I don't recommend open awareness meditation to beginners because sitting there without listening to a prompt and just watching your mind change channels can be really disturbing. I don't recommend it. So I've been running this group for free. In March it'll be 5 years because it started when the lockdown happened, and I do it holidays. I show up wherever I am on the planet Earth for these people. And now, after almost 5 years, we do a couple moments of open awareness at the end of a guided meditation, but it's always going to be, and there's silence on and off throughout, but there's always going to be me redirecting their mind to whatever the prompt is. And I teach compassion, loving kindness meditations of one variety or another. It's extemporaneous, I'm not scripted. But the reason I do that is because wishing others well and wishing yourself well has been shown to make people more altruistic. So it raises the bar for humanity.
Fascinating. It's like kind of like our thoughts kind of control our reality. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What is God? And by the way, you mentioned you've been doing this class for 5 years since the lockdown. I can't believe it's been 5 years already.
In March, can you believe that? I mean,
Mm.
what a thing that we went through as a planet.
It's crazy.
It's
And I
crazy.
can't, 5 years ago, it doesn't, it feels like, it feels simultaneously like 5 minutes ago and also like forever ago simultaneously.
I agree
So
with you.
weird. What is, what is open awareness meditation? What does that mean? And what's the difference between like a guided meditation?
So, open awareness meditation, when I first did it, it was at a Buddhist retreat in Berkeley, California, and you just sit down and they don't say anything to you. And then they ring a bell in a half hour. And you're just sitting there so freaking uncomfortable and you don't know where I mean, you're breathing, so you could, I suppose, see and feel your body breathing in and out, but they don't even say that.
Yeah.
So you're just sitting there. And then I asked one of the teachers, he was a monk guy, who also I found out was an architect on the side, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah.
But I asked him, can you say out your mouth what was going on in your mind while you were sitting there looking like the Buddha? And he was like, I forgot to pick up orange juice. I need to leave earlier in the morning for this, that, and the other thing. I left that stuff on my desk. Like he just said out his mouth the whole thing. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, now I know I don't want to do that, right? Because
Uh-huh.
people say, oh, they can't blank their mind. You're not going to blank your mind. You're a primate. We're
Hmm.
wired to worry and ruminate. That's why we're still on the planet alive, right?
Right.
So, in order to quiet that kind of radio station monkey mind thing that we all have, give people a prompt, a
Mm.
word, a phrase, a something to put in the foreground to quiet the background.
Hmm.
So,
So how do people know like if they're doing it right?
well, I think the proof is in the pudding. Like,
Yeah.
eventually, and it's going to be different every single day. But if you listen to Balanced Mind with Julie Potiker, which is free anywhere you get your podcasts, eventually you're going to find bigger spaces of calm and bigger spaces of actually hearing what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
And then, I mean, when I first started teaching this group, I pushed them from like 5 minutes to 12 minutes. Now we're consistently at 20 minutes and people could do more.
Yeah. How often are you meditating? Do you meditate every day
I
or?
meditate every day, but not always formally. So I'm glad you asked this because mindfulness and daily life activities are as healthy as sitting in a formal meditation. So if you're paying attention to what you're doing when you're doing it, you're not time traveling to the past and to the future, you're getting brain health. So, like if you're
Interesting.
cooking, or if you're walking, or if you're listening to bird song, or if you're whatever it is that you're doing, if you're mindful, meaning that you're not doing your to-do list at the same time, or
Yeah.
rehashing some disturbing thing, or worrying about the future, that's a mindfulness and daily life activity. And I drop in and out of that, I don't know how many times a day, 20.
Wow, wow. So to put it in kind of like more basic terms, it's shown to be, would you agree that it's shown to be healthy for the brain to be very present? Like, so if you're cooking dinner, you're only thinking about like what you're doing in that exact moment and you're not thinking about, oh gosh, this thing happened earlier and I'm so annoyed by it, or you're not thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to hurry up this dinner because I need to do my taxes later and I want to get to bed early and so you're not thinking about the past or the future, you're just completely present in whatever's right now only.
Bingo.
And
Bingo. And then all the science benefits, which they've written about ad nauseum to try to get people that don't want to do it to do it. And I'm actually glad that they do that because it makes me feel better teaching it. Like,
yeah,
yes, anxiety will go down, depression will go down, wellness will go up. What do you mean by wellness? Wellness will go up. And then they go into all the categories of you'll be more likely to keep your diet and exercise plan. Your telomeres won't fray as quickly, so your brain will be more healthy. You're then they go into the circulatory system. They can show you this isn't a pill, it's something I can do, and it has all these health benefits. No way. Way.
amazing. Yeah, and you can do that just with the power of your own mind.
Yeah, we're very powerful creatures. We really are.
Yeah, yeah, the mind is wild. So, you mentioned Balanced Mind with Julie Potiker. Is that like a
It's a
podcast?
podcast. It's a
Okay,
podcast. It's free. There's hundreds of meditations on there. And if you're a little bit of a poetry lover like I am, reader and writer, each meditation has a poem
cool.
at the end.
Very cool. So it's like a collection of your guided meditations. Do
Every
you,
single Wednesday, I record them.
oh, really?
Yeah, I record them just on my phone, like, easy cheesy. And I send them to my friend Patty, and she puts them on the podcast with the show notes, with the poem, with the author and the poet. I always say the author, of course, and
Yeah,
the actual text of the poem. So you could end up finding delicious poets
amazing.
after you meditate, like, two bangs for your buck.
Amazing. And is that that's not on YouTube, it's just on like Spotify and Apple and
It's
like
anywhere
podcast?
you get your podcasts.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. And do you ever have guests or is it just you guiding
No, it's
meditation?
just me.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. How long you been doing that for?
Uh, I think 5 years.
Yeah. So did would you say like the pandemic lockdowns really inspired you to share mindfulness and meditation with the world?
Yes, and it also, so this is weird, and people don't know this. I became a poet.
Really?
Yeah, because so I was researching poets like crazy because every time I would pick a poem, it has to have the right feeling at the end of a meditation. It needs to be like peaceful and calm and loving and gorgeous, and some of the poems are dead, poets are dead, some of them are very much alive, and I would reach out to them and say, "Can I read this poem? It will end up being recorded," like that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then I started writing poetry. And so I would read my poems to my group like they were guinea pigs. And I'm like, "Is this any good?" And they're like, "Yes, you should publish it." And then I would send them out to get, and then some of them would get published. And so now I have a manuscript and I'm
Oh,
waiting. I'm trying not to get attached to the outcome, but it's supposed to get presented to the acquisition team at a publishing house this week.
oh, amazing. That's so cool. What
So
a
yeah,
coincidence.
I could be a debut poet. I'm going to be 64 next year. I mean next month. So
Oh my gosh, you
I
look so
could
young.
thank you. Well, it's that thing on Zoom that
I think it's the mindfulness.
wipes off your yeah. Anyway, um I could be a debut poet at the age of 64.
That's amazing. I like that. It's so inspiring. It's like, there's no age where you can or cannot do something.
Exactly. Exactly. It is so much fun. And there's so much poetry in America. There's all these poets that do these Zoom things that I watch. And they have Q&A and they're reading their poems and they're reading other people's poems. And I mean, oh my God, it's gorgeous.
That's so cool. So you've got two books out already, and you might have a book of poetry on the way.
Yeah, well, I will for sure have a book of poetry. I just don't know whether it's going to be a traditional publisher or whether I'll have to go with a hybrid publisher. I mean, I have a manuscript that a really well-known beloved poet took like 100 of my poems, chose 50 of them, put them in an order that he thought made sense. So I got help with this.
That is so cool. Congratulations.
And it's a guy that I found because I read his poem a couple years ago. I reached out to him and said, "Can I read this to my group? I'm not a quack. Here's my website." And then he loved what I was doing. And then we started corresponding and I started sending him poems. And then I saw that he was going to be a poet at a mindfulness retreat. So I went so that we could be actual in 3D face to face with each other.
Yeah.
And then he agreed to take me on as a client. So, like, who knows what's happening in the universe?
Yeah. And see, I think that is a testament to you should always like whatever you're doing, like go for it. Like ask the question, ask for help, reach out to the person because you never know where it's
It's
gonna lead to.
incredible. It's incredible chutzpah, is what it is. But I just feel like people love mentoring people
Yeah.
because I know that because I mentor people. And there's so much to learn from other people. There's so much that I don't know, which was how I found Rick Hansen. I just kept taking classes from him and then showing up in person,
Yeah.
and then he was like, "Wow, this girl really wants to learn."
Yeah, and it's like people like to mentor people and people like it when they see that you're into something. Like if they're like, "Wow, you're really into this and this is something that I'm into, so I'd like to share like what I know." Like usually people are like, "Hey, if you're into what I'm into, I'm gonna bring you along for the ride."
Yes, and there's this image that I love, which is the path, let's say.
Hmm.
You could think about it in spiritual terms, and there's people way ahead of you reaching their hand back to you, and there's you reaching your hand back to others, and it's just like this chain of gorgeous humanity. We're all connected, but people are farther along than me. People have been doing whatever it is that I'm doing way longer. And then there's people that are just starting that I'm like, come on, I've got you.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Speaking of spirituality, meditation and spirituality are often kind of hand in hand. And would you say that meditation can also be like a form of prayer time?
It is a prayer.
Yeah.
It is. I didn't want to admit that. I talk about that in my first book.
Uh-huh.
I had this like anti-prayer thing. I'm like totally 180 on that now at this age. But I mean, when you're wishing other people well, you are praying. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy and may you find moments of ease. That's a prayer.
Yeah.
That's a prayer. That feels good.
And our mind, our mind really is powerful and it really kind of creates the reality that we live in. So if that's what your thoughts and words are, then, in theory, you'll be living in a more beautiful community.
When I am traveling and I am waiting online for security, my practice for the past 10 years at least has been to say those phrases to the strangers and to the staff.
Do you say this like internally or like you actually go up to people?
No, 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 they would think I was really crazy. No, no. In my head, that's what I do. And my husband knows I'm doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
then
you're
I
just
get
sending them
there and I'm not anxious.
totally. So you're in the security line and you're just like, I'm
I
sending
do
you
it. I do
compassion.
it.
I wish for your happiness. I'm sending you joy in your life and may
Exactly.
you get through the security line peacefully. And then suddenly that feeling washes over you.
Right. And then it always happens in the airport. I make it a practice in the airport because otherwise I would be nervous, right? Otherwise I would have anxiety. I would be annoyed. I don't want any of that.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're like, oh, I got to get through this line.
I
Come
don't want to
on.
feel
Wh-
that.
Why aren't you going faster, person in front of me? Why do you have so many
Yeah.
things to put in the bin?
I don't want to feel that. And the same thing at the grocery store, so that by the time I get up to the person who's the cashier, I'm just feeling love and I'm radiating it. Okay, our energy goes out 3 feet from our body. They know that.
Mm-hmm.
That person's feeling that, and it's going to make their day better. And then the next person benefits from that, the person in the line behind me. And so it goes.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a great way to live. I love that. So the book of poetry might be on the way. You'll definitely have to keep me posted on that. Do you have any other projects or plans going on other than that, or is it just the Snap book and the poetry book and the podcast and
I,
mindfulness classes, or what
I'm
what else do you have going on?
I'm going to start teaching. So I'm part of the UCSD Center for Mindfulness teaching team.
Oh,
And
cool.
I'm going to start teaching at the UCSD extension for seniors and older people. I'm going to start volunteering to teach for them as a donation to UCSD Center for Mindfulness. So they can throw me in there and not have to pay me, and that way I'm pro bono teaching and it benefits the Center for Mindfulness. So I'm doing that. And I started a poetry credential class that's 25 weeks long, and week one was last Thursday. And so because I'm self-taught, sometimes these things come up and I'm like, is that a poem? Is that a short story? Oh, it could be a lyric poem. Like I'm going back to actually learn with a professor, with the guy that used to be the poet laureate who's been teaching poetry in our town for like 35 years, but this is on Zoom. I'm taking his credential class. Not that I need to hang up a credential, but just so that okay, part of this is honestly an inner critic thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the imposter syndrome thing that people get,
Mm-hmm.
I have a little bit of that, but also I'm a lifelong learner. So I want to know what people would learn if they took an actual academic course in poetry. So I was looking at low residency masters of fine arts where you
Cool.
show up for 2 weeks, twice, I think, but then all the rest of it is online, but it takes 2 years. And then I was thinking, you know what? This is quicker and it's gonna give me it's like the 80/20. It's gonna give me a enough that I'll feel less of a fraud and maybe my poems will get better, even though people think they're good.
Yeah, I'm sure they're great, and I'm sure you're just going to keep getting better as a lifelong learner. Can you share, or do you mind sharing for anyone who's maybe listening and they're like, "Hey, I want to try that." Who's your credential teacher?
His name is Ron Salisbury, and it's through Writers Inc. in San Diego.
Cool. And so, are you teaching like at a college university mindfulness?
Not right now. During the pandemic, I was hired by a college in Ohio
Hmm.
because they got government funding for wellness for their students during the lockdown. So I did that on Zoom.
Very cool.
Indianapolis just reached out to me because they got grant money for the Jewish community. They want me to do a program. Like stuff just happens like that, and
Yeah.
I'm just happy to do it. And I've taught three nonprofits in San Diego. I've taught their staff. I've done workshops for free for their staff, just so that their staff can manage themselves so that their workplace is a little bit less stressful.
Yeah.
So I mostly volunteer, or if I have to get paid, give a donation because I feel like this is part of my spiritual practice, why I was placed here. I'm not actually, I mean, I would love for people to buy my books, don't get me wrong, but I'm not using this to make a buck.
Yeah, you're doing it to help people in the world.
Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, as we kind of wrap up this episode, for anyone who wants to find your books or find your courses or your meditations, can you leave us with like where can people find you?
If they go to my website, they'll find everything. It's mindful methods with an S for FOR life.com. And there's not only my books in there. If they go to the resource tab, they'll find all my teachers' books and any book that I have read in my genre that I think would be awesome for them to read, plus everybody else's newsletters.
Amazing. Thank you for compiling all those resources. So yeah, mindfulmethodsforlife.com. Julie Potiker is the author, and the book is Snap from Chaos to Calm. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for what you do. You really present great programming. I'm so happy to be here.